The summer morning air was cool and crisp as John Mitchell stepped onto the tarmac at Jackson Evers International Airport in Mississippi. He tugged the brim of his baseball cap lower against the rising sun, squinting toward the twin propellers of the small commuter plane that would carry him north to St. Louis. For John, this was an ordinary business trip, just another routine segment of a life built around corporate meetings, conference calls, and the hum of fluorescent office lights. He had flown dozens of times before, each takeoff a familiar thrill, each landing a quiet relief. But on July 15, 1989, routine would give way to chaos, and calm confidence to raw edge-of-survival terror. As he settled into seat 3A, John took note of the cabin's passengers: a mother cradling her infant, a pair of elderly tourists clutching guidebooks, and a handful of fellow business travelers tapping at notebooks or reading newspapers. No one seemed particularly uneasy. After all, commuter flights like this saw hundreds of departures daily. The flight attendant offered a warm smile, reminding everyone to fasten seatbelts and stow carry-ons. John clicked his belt into place, folded his hands in his lap, and gazed out the window as the engines roared to life. The plane rolled down the runway, wheels thundering against asphalt, then lifted gracefully into the clear blue sky. 9 minutes into the flight, just as John was glancing down at his open briefcase, a terrifying shudder rippled through the fuselage. The engine sputtered. The aircraft lurched. Passenger heads snapped forward. Oxygen masks dangled but did not deploy. The roar of the wind drowning the engines seemed impossibly loud. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice crackled over the PA, thin with static, "we've lost power in the left engine. I'm going to attempt an emergency landing. Please remain calm and brace for impact." The words hung suspended in John's mind. Calm? Brace? Impact? His heart pounded so fiercely he could almost feel it in his throat. Below them, the Mississippi trees rose like a forest of daggers aimed at the sky. The pilot's hands steered the wounded aircraft toward a stretch of levee road cutting between the river and farmland. John gripped the armrests until his knuckles whitened. He recalled the flight attendant's instructions: bend forward, hands overhead, but fear rendered his mind numb. He felt the plane's belly scrape the road, a grinding smash of metal against pavement, the wingtip slicing through a fence post. The roar of destruction gave way to a sudden jolt, and then silence, broken only by frantic cries and the hiss of leaking hydraulic fluid. John's world spun. He felt himself thrust against his seatbelt, then suddenly limp, weightless as the belt snapped him back. The overhead compartment doors swung open, disgorging maps and magazines into the aisle. The fuselage popped and groaned like a wounded beast. He heard the mother's shriek behind him, the infant's frantic cries. Smoke curled around his ankles, stinging his nostrils. Somehow, as if on autopilot, John unbuckled and crawled toward the emergency exit at the front of the cabin. His mind cataloged every detail: the twisted metal frame, the scent of burnt fuel, the cacophony of shouts, and yet he moved with practiced precision. The exit door blew outward, revealing the bright, shimmering heat of the Mississippi summer. He climbed onto the wing, stumbled to the ground, and rolled away just as the fuselage erupted in flames. Seconds later, the plane was a fireball, flaming remnants collapsing inward. John lay on the hot asphalt, ears ringing, lungs burning with each ragged breath. He saw fellow passengers emerge in a stunned daze, some bleeding, some covered in soot. A few stumbled toward him, grateful eyes meeting his. Strangers embraced, tears mingling with sweat, as sirens tore through the morning air. John sat up, trembling, adrenaline coursing through every nerve. He looked back at the wreckage, charred, twisted, impossible to reconcile with the once sleek commuter plane. He realized in that moment that he was alive against all odds. The world rushed in, paramedics calling out names, reporters swarming the perimeter, investigators snapping photos. He was help, he was survivor, he was miracle. Over the next days, John would endure surgeries to mend broken bones, countless x-rays, nights haunted by nightmares of plummeting metal. Yet, even amid the pain and panic, something deeper stirred, a sense that life had, in some inexplicable way, chosen him to go on. As he lay in his hospital bed, hooked to beeping monitors, he found himself asking the same question over and over: why me? And in that question lay the seed of something greater, an unspoken promise that his story was far from over. When John Mitchell first opened his eyes in the sterile, humming confines of the hospital room, the world felt unsteady, as if the walls themselves were swaying beneath a roiling sky. His body was encased in bandages and braces. A plaster cast hugged his right leg, a rigid splint supported his left forearm, and a mesh of sutures ran from his forehead down to his cheekbone. Every breath sent lancing shards of pain shooting through his ribs, reminders of the force that had thrown him against the cabin interior. Yet, beneath the haze of morphine and exhaustion, a single thought echoed in his mind: I survived. The first week blended into a montage of intravenous drips, checkups by the surgical team, and visits from friends and family who offered well-worn get-well cards and hopeful smiles. His sister Marlene clutched his hand with a strength that belied her trembling voice. "We thought we'd lost you," she whispered, tears glimmering in her eyes. John managed to nod, but no words could bridge the gulf between gratitude and the fear that it could all have ended so differently. Physical therapy began before he even left the hospital. Each morning, a gentle therapist helped him sit up, slide to the edge of the bed, and then, through a blur of sweat and determination, stand on his one good leg. The first time he took a single step, his body protested with a symphony of creaks and spasms, but the ache of victory was more potent than any painkiller. He felt reborn with each inch he managed to put behind him, the floor solid beneath his feet, signaling that gravity could no longer hold him captive. Yet, while his body slowly reclaimed its strength, his mind remained caught in the aftermath of chaos. Nights were the hardest. In the dim glow of the hallway light, he would wake, heart pounding, as the thunderous roar of failing engines and the shuddering lurch of the fuselage replayed on loop behind his eyelids. Sweat drenched his pajamas as he gasped for air, convinced that the plane was still descending. Marlene installed a baby monitor outside his door, its soft clicks and the reassurance of voices from the hallway, enough to pull him back from the brink. By week 3, John was discharged to a rehabilitation center where his days filled with structured routines: morning stretches, afternoon hydrotherapy sessions in the warm pool, and evenings spent journaling reflections on his ordeal. He wrote of the fear that had consumed him, the faces of strangers who became heroes, the flight attendant who led him to the exit, the farmer whose pickup truck had ferried him away from the burning wreckage, and the paramedic whose steady hands saved his life. But most poignantly, he wrote of a question that refused to be silenced: why me? Friends and colleagues stopped by in a steady procession, bringing casseroles, magazines, and frantic congratulations. His boss, a silver-haired executive named Carl, clasped John's shoulders. "You're our miracle," Carl said, voice thick with emotion. "The company flew in a replacement right away, but we held off, hoping you'd pull through." John forced a smile, grateful yet uneasy. He worried about leaving others in the lurch, but deeper still was the gnawing sense that something in his life had shifted. The ordinary rhythms of work and deadlines suddenly felt trivial against the backdrop of the life and death struggle he'd endured. It was his psychiatrist, Dr. Harper, who first voiced the idea that would take root in John's mind. During one afternoon session, as John described the violent jolt that had thrown him forward and then back, Dr. Harper leaned forward. "Surviving a plane crash is statistically rare," she said gently. "Surviving twice is extraordinary. Many would say it's sheer coincidence. Others might see destiny at play." John stared at her, the sterile walls of the therapy room momentarily dissolving into something vast and unknown. Was he simply incredibly lucky, or was there a purpose to his endurance? As summer turned to autumn, John was allowed short trips outside under strict supervision. One crisp morning, Marlene wheels him into the garden courtyard. Leaves crunched beneath his cast boot as he practiced walking between pale green hedges. A swallow darted overhead, graceful in flight. He paused, studying the bird's effortless arcs. Flight, once a symbol of fear and disaster, now a beacon of possibility. In that moment, the question, "Why me?" began to shift into, "What now?" Letters arrived from people whose names he didn't recognize, strangers thanking him for surviving, motivated to fly again or to overcome their own fears because of his story. He read each one with shaking hands, tears blurring the ink. In every letter, there was a reflection of his own trajectory, from helpless passenger to survivor, and, unexpectedly, to inspiration. His identity as a corporate road warrior was fading. A new identity, ambassador of hope, was emerging. By the end of the second month, John was walking without assistance for short distances. His arm still ached, but he could flex his fingers enough to write legible notes. The physical milestones earned applause. The emotional breakthroughs were quieter, more subtle. He began to dream of speaking before audiences, of sharing his story to kindle resilience in those who needed it. And as he looked ahead, a shadow of doubt flickered. Would his life's next chapter bring peace or another test of his fragile mortality? He didn't yet know that less than 2 years later, he would board another doomed flight, one whose echoes would intertwine with this first catastrophe in ways he could never have imagined. But for now, as the sun set behind the hospital wings and John steadied himself on a walker, the only certainty was that survival had become his new purpose, and that destiny, whatever its form, had not finished writing his story. The morning of April 22, 1991, dawned cool and clear over Denver International Airport. John Mitchell, now 32, stepped from a black sedan into the bustle of travelers guiding rolling suitcases past gleaming jet bridges. Gone was the tentative man clinging to a walker. In his place stood someone leaner, his gait fluid, his shoulders squared with renewed confidence. It had been nearly 2 years since the crash in Mississippi, and in that time, John had transformed himself, body, mind, and soul, to embrace life's fragility and affirm his will to persevere. He had accepted a speaking engagement in Seattle, eager both to share his journey of survival and to reclaim the sky as a friend rather than a foe. His keynote, From Wreckage to Wings, had sold out months in advance, and the thrill of facing an expectant crowd was a reminder that his purpose extended far beyond the lonely corridors of the hospital. Today, though, he would bookend that purpose by boarding Flight 591, a routine American Airlines jet bound for Seattle via Dallas. It was, he told himself, simply a means to an end, a vessel to carry him toward his next chapter. John breezed through security with the practiced ease of a frequent flyer. As he approached Gate C-17, he tucked his speech notes into his briefcase and took a moment to observe the activity around him. Flight attendants offered water bottles to waiting passengers. A businessman in a crisp suit tapped away at a laptop. A young couple shared a set of earbuds, giggling at the same clip on a smartphone. The terminal's muted carpet and low ceilings had replaced the leveled forests and rutted road of his first crash. Yet, across the years, the anxiety still fluttered faintly in his stomach. He checked his boarding pass, seat 12C, and made his way down the jet bridge. The fuselage felt cool under his palm as he entered the cabin, greeted by a flight attendant's polite welcome aboard. John found his seat, settled his carry-on in the overhead bin, and clicked his belt snug. He listened as others around him completed the safety demonstration, the same prelude to countless journeys. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe this would be just another flight. The engine spooled up, the wheels pressed into asphalt, and the jet climbed steadily into thin, pale air. John flipped open his notebook to review the bullet points of his planned talk. Survival statistics, recovery milestones, lessons in resilience. He glanced out the window at the shifting patchwork of farmland below, recalling the levee road in Mississippi. The memory was sharp, the sickening lurch, the grinding crash, the flames. A tremor of unease ran through him, but he clenched his jaw, inhaled slowly, and exhaled. This is safe, he told himself. This is routine. 3 hours into the flight, as they crossed above Kansas, a soft chime sounded. The seatbelt light flicked on. The captain's calm voice crackled through the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a hydraulic pressure issue in the left wing. We're returning to Denver. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." The words sliced through John's confidence like shards of glass. Hydraulic pressure? Left wing? Return? His mind whirled. Hydraulics controlled the flaps and landing gear, critical for touchdown. Around him, murmurs rippled. The young couple gripped each other's hands. The businessman tapped nervously at his tablet, brow furrowing. The flight attendant paused mid-stride, her practiced smile replaced by concern. John's pulse thundered, each beat a hammer blow in his ears. Not again, he thought, the memories of the first crash surging like a tide. His knuckles whitened around the armrests as the pilot's voice returned. "We'll circle for about 20 minutes to diagnose the issue, then we'll make our approach on runway 35 right. Cabin crew, please prepare for an uneventful precautionary landing." Precautionary landing. The words felt like a cruel joke. There was no such thing as precaution when steel and speed danced above the earth. In the aisle, a flight attendant began securing the service carts. Overhead bins clicked shut one by one. The engines made a low growl as the plane banked, redirecting its course toward the Rockies, then back toward Denver. Outside the window, the horizon dipped and rose as they circled, the city's sprawl beckoning like a wound that needed to be stitched. John closed his eyes, forcing his racing thoughts to still. He called to mind the breathing techniques he had learned in therapy, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 6. With each measured breath, the chaos within him receded, replaced by the clarity that had guided him through recovery. He was not the frightened man of '89. He was a survivor, an advocate, a storyteller. If this ends badly, he thought, people will remember only that I perished again. He rejected that thought fiercely. His purpose lay in living, not in dying. 20 minutes later, the captain's voice rang out once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for approach. Expect the runway in approximately 10 minutes. Cabin crew, please take your seats." The plane banked one final time, and John centered himself, pressing his back into the seat, securing his belt. The cabin fell into silence, a collective intake of breath shared by every passenger. The descent felt timeless. Wind buffeted the fuselage, clouds scraped along the windows, and lights of the city glittered below like shards of broken glass. John's heart thundered, but his mind was a rock. The landing gear extended with a metallic clunk that echoed down the aisle. The runway lights aligned like arrows guiding a wounded bird home. With the first wheel kiss, the gentle imprint of tire on tarmac, a gale of relief and triumph swept through John. The second and third sets followed in a smooth progression, and the engines reversed thrust. The plane decelerated, the roar fading into a gentle hum. Then, with a final sigh, the aircraft rolled to a stop. A burst of applause rose from the cabin, uncertain, relieved, grateful. John exhaled fully, his eyes misty as he unbuckled. He offered a nod to the flight attendant, whose hand trembled slightly as she opened his door. He stood, legs steady, and walked down the aisle toward the exit, each step a testament to the journey that had reshaped him. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the cold Denver air met his face, carrying with it the scent of rain on concrete. He paused, looking back at the aircraft that had threatened to claim him twice. The engines were silent now, but the echoes remained. Memories of fear, resilience, and the fragile thread that separates life from oblivion. John inhaled deeply. He was alive. He had survived twice. And somewhere beyond the horizon, his next chapter awaited, one that would challenge him to reconcile coincidence and destiny, to find meaning in survival, and to share that meaning with a world perpetually in flight. The early morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of John Mitchell's hotel room in Seattle, casting slender golden beams across the floor. He awoke slowly, muscles still tight from the turbulence of the previous day's flight. Though the precautionary landing had gone smoothly, he felt the residue of two near catastrophes pulsing through his veins, an echo of metal groaning, a phantom jolt at every heartbeat. He lay perfectly still, listening to the low hum of traffic and distant gulls calling over Puget Sound, and wondered how long it would take before the specter of fear finally loosened its grip. By mid-morning, John had showered and dressed in the crisp navy suit he reserved for major speaking engagements. Each movement, slipping into his dress shirt, tying his striped tie, felt deliberate, a ritual of transformation from private survivor to public voice. His reflection in the mirror showed a man tempered by ordeal, dark circles beneath steady blue eyes, faint scars tracing his forehead and cheek, and a posture both relaxed and unflinchingly upright. The external image was nearly indistinguishable from any corporate consultant ready to deliver insights on leadership and resilience. But behind those calm eyes lay memories few could comprehend. John's first appointment was a live television interview at a local news studio. As he was escorted through the buzzing corridors, camera crews stacking lights, he felt a familiar flutter in his chest. He breathed deeply, recalling Dr. Harper's mantra, "You are not your fear. You are the sum of every moment you choose to rise." He repeated it silently, and the knots in his stomach loosened just enough to grant him composure. In the studio, the anchor greeted him warmly. The interview began with polite questions about his keynote speech. How did he prepare? What motivated him to speak so candidly about survival? John answered with practiced ease, highlighting the power of vulnerability and the lessons gleaned from confronting mortality. Then, as the segment drew to a close, the anchor pivoted. "John, you're one of the very few people who've survived 2 airplane emergencies. Do you believe there's meaning behind this? Coincidence or destiny?" A hush fell over the set. John paused, considering the words. Cameras whirred softly. Minutes or lifetimes passed in that silence. Finally, he spoke, voice clear. "I can't answer that with certainty. Statistically, surviving 1 crash is extraordinary. Surviving 2 veers into the realm of miracle. At first, I clung to the idea of coincidence, random chance sparing me twice. But as I reflect on the people I've met, the messages I've received, and the purpose that's opened before me, I sense something more. Maybe destiny is not a predetermined script, but an invitation, a call to live fully, to share our stories, to help others find strength amidst chaos. If that's fate, then I choose to embrace it." The anchor nodded, turning to the camera for the sign-off. John exhaled, the tension releasing in a gentle wave. Behind the bright lights and polished veneer, he felt the flicker of hope that perhaps his story could illuminate a path for others. After the broadcast, John returned to his hotel, determined to explore Seattle's waterfront before the evening's main event. The air was crisp, tinged with salt from the bay. He walked along the wooden piers, pausing to watch ferries gliding between downtown and the islands. Near the edge, an elderly man sat feeding seagulls, his weathered hat brimmed low. John greeted him with a nod. The man looked up, smiled, and offered half a worn baguette. "For the birds," he said. John accepted, scattering crumbs into the breeze. As wings fluttered and cries echoed, John contemplated how fragile and how fierce life could be. That afternoon, John found himself in a quiet church pew, invited by a local survivor support group to share his experiences. Dozens gathered in the Sunlight Hall, veterans of accidents, first responders, grieving family members. When it was his turn, he rose slowly, suit jacket in hand. His voice trembled only slightly as he recounted the Mississippi crash, the long nights of therapy, the second emergency over Kansas. But as he spoke of recovery, of letters from strangers igniting his passion to speak, his tone grew steadier, threaded with conviction. Afterward, hands reached out to touch his sleeve. A young woman, tears in her eyes, whispered, "You saved me. I was terrified to fly again until I heard your story." Another man, voice thick with emotion, said simply, "Thank you for going back up there." John sat back down with a lump in his throat. It was one thing to conquer fear for himself, it was quite another to help others conquer theirs. In that humble community hall, surrounded by raw grief and raw gratitude, he felt the full weight and the profound gift of his survival. As evening approached, John prepared for his keynote at the grand ballroom of the Westin. The stage was set with a single lectern, flanked by understated floral arrangements. Rows of chairs filled rapidly with an eager audience. Backstage, John strapped on a wireless microphone and glanced at the teleprompter screen, though he had memorized every line. His pulse quickened not with dread, but with anticipation. When he stepped onto the stage, silence fell like a velvet curtain. He began, "Good evening, everyone. 2 years ago, I faced death in a wrecked fuselage in Mississippi. Yesterday, I braced for impact above Kansas. Today, I stand before you alive, not by chance alone, but by the collective compassion of strangers, the unwavering support of loved ones, and a personal resolve to transform trauma into purpose." The applause that followed was warm, resonant, not for theatrics, but for shared humanity. For the next hour, John led the audience through the arc of his journey, from terror to recovery, from despair to empowerment. He illustrated each point with vivid anecdotes: the farmer's pickup truck, the flight attendant's steady calm, the letters that bridged his battered heart to thousands of souls. His closing message was simple yet profound. We may not control the winds that buffet us, but we can choose how we spread our wings. Every one of us has a story worth telling, and every survival, every triumph over fear is a beacon for someone still searching in the dark. As lights dimmed and standing ovations swelled, John bowed deeply. Backstage, he felt tears of relief and gratitude mingle on his cheeks. He had turned coincidence into conviction, destiny into dialogue, and in doing so, he'd uncovered a new horizon for his life's work. That night, alone in his hotel room, John gazed at the city lights stretching beyond the glass walls. He pondered the journey ahead: more flights to board, more stages to grace, more hearts to reach. Yet beneath the exhilaration lay a quiet question, one that tethered him to the past even as he soared toward the future. When will destiny call him back into the sky, once more to test his resolve, to challenge his faith in survival? And somewhere in that lingering silence, the answer waited, poised on the wind. The pre-dawn hush of his home office in suburban Denver felt surreal to John Mitchell as he sat at his desk, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across framed photos of planes in mid-flight. His laptop screen displayed the draft of his next book, tentatively titled Wings of Purpose, but the blinking cursor refused to yield to his thoughts. He stared at the blank page, grappling with a question that had haunted him ever since his Seattle speaking engagement. Who was he, truly, beyond the labels of survivor and motivational speaker? In the quiet, he heard again the roar of engines and the snap of twisting metal. Those sounds no longer triggered panic, but a deeper resonance, an echo of destiny's call. Yet this morning, with the Rocky Mountains faintly outlined against the eastern sky, John realized that destiny was not only found in dramatic moments of crisis. It could also lie in the still spaces between them, in the spaces where memories and aspirations intertwined. He pushed back from the desk and rose, crossing the hardwood floor to the window. A thin veil of fog curled across the lawn, and beyond it, the soaring peaks wore crowns of snow even in late spring. He curled his hands around a mug of black coffee, its warmth seeping through his palms. The steam rose in lazy spirals, a reminder that life, like these curls of vapor, was delicate yet persistent, a balance he had come to understand all too well. John thought back to the impromptu survivors group in Seattle, the tremulous gratitude in strangers' voices, the communal recognition that survival was only the beginning of a new journey. He recalled Marlene's unwavering faith, Dr. Harper's compassionate insight, and the farmer who had simply done what any good person might. Their gestures had woven a safety net beneath him, catching him when gravity had failed. How could he repay such kindness? How could he translate his gratitude into lasting action? He returned to his desk and opened a fresh document. His fingers moved almost of their own accord, sketching an outline. Origins of the calling, tracing the first stirrings of purpose in the hospital corridors. Gathering the flock, building a community of survivors, caregivers, and advocates. Beyond the stage, creating programs to support trauma victims long after the applause fades. The unseen crashes, acknowledging the everyday disasters that go unnoticed, from silent battles with mental health to invisible scars of loss. An emissary of hope, his vision for a global network of flight guardians, volunteers trained to assist survivors and their families. As he typed, the words began to flow, each sentence a bridge between memory and mission. He described the hours spent in hydrotherapy, the ache of muscles remembering trauma, and the gradual triumph of reclaiming movement. He recounted the letters that had arrived months after his first crash, some from veteran pilots haunted by past brushes with death, others from young adults paralyzed by fear of flying, each one a testament to the ripples a single story could create. 4 years had passed since the first accident, and 2 since the second. In that time, John had logged thousands of flight hours without incident. Yet every departure still carried a quiet gravity, a solemn acknowledgement of what might have been. He wrote of that tension, the duality of flight as both liberation and risk, of trusting invisible wings to bear one's weight while knowing all too well how they could fail. His narrative shifted to the heart of his new project, a foundation to fund trauma counseling for crash survivors and their families. He described meetings with airline executives and nonprofit leaders, drafting grant proposals and forging alliances with mental health professionals. He detailed the pilot program launched at Jackson Evers International, the very airport where his ordeal began, offering free follow-up therapy to anyone involved in an incident, big or small. As dawn yielded to morning, sunlight filled the room. John paused and leaned back, satisfied that the chapter had captured not only his own reflections, but also a broader vision, that survival was not the end of a story, but an invitation to write new chapters for others. He saved the file and stretched, muscles loosening in quiet gratitude. Outside, his phone buzzed with messages. A reporter seeking an update on his foundation's progress. A fan thanking him for an Instagram post about confronting fear, and a notification that his keynote in Atlanta next month had sold out. Each ping reminded him that his story still resonated, that destiny's work continued even in the routines of daily life. Before diving into his schedule, John stepped onto the back porch where the air was alive with birdsong. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the gentle pulse of the world around him. 2 crashes had taught him that life could be shredded in an instant, but also that in every wreckage lay the seeds of renewal. Now, as the sun broke over the horizon, he resolved to nurture those seeds, to be more than a living miracle, but a catalyst for others to find strength, purpose, and hope. He raised his coffee in a silent toast to the morning and to the unseen paths that lay ahead. Destiny, he knew now, was not a single event, but a tapestry of choices, threads woven by countless hands, including his own. And with every step he took, every word he shared, he helped guide that tapestry toward light. The hotel room in Atlanta was dimly lit when John Mitchell finally returned from his sold-out keynote. The echoes of applause still reverberated in his mind, mingling with the soft hum of the HVAC unit. He removed his jacket and loosened his tie, feeling the weight of another day spent channeling survival into inspiration. Yet beneath the satisfaction lingered an undercurrent of unease, an awareness that the fiercest battles were often the ones we couldn't see. John sat at the small desk by the window, opening the blinds to reveal a tapestry of city lights. Below, cars streamed through boulevards lined with Spanish moss-draped oaks, their taillights like burning embers in the night. He poured himself a glass of water and gazed at the scene, recalling how 2 flights had once collapsed his world in an instant. He knew well the visible scars, broken bones, charred fuselage, but there were also hidden fractures, the silent tremors that lingered in the mind long after the body healed. He thought of the letters he'd received from survivors who never boarded a plane again, not out of respect for risk, but out of fear that shadowed every aspect of their lives. Fear of driving over bridges, fear of elevators, fear of storm clouds gathering overhead. These were the unseen turbulences, and John realized that addressing them required more than public speeches and foundation launches. It demanded intimate, sustained support. Determined, he retrieved his laptop and drafted an email to Dr. Harper. Subject: Expanding the Survivors Network. Dear Dr. Harper, I hope this finds you well. After reflecting on our work together and the tremendous response from my recent Atlanta talk, I believe the time has come to evolve our approach. I propose establishing a digital peer support platform, a secure, moderated forum where survivors, caregivers, and mental health professionals can connect around the clock. Let's discuss integrating trauma-informed practices, guided meditation sessions, and real-time crisis intervention capabilities. I'd like to set up a meeting next week to outline the technical requirements and secure initial funding. Warm regards, John. He paused before hitting send, running a mental checklist. The need for confidentiality safeguards, the importance of involving licensed counselors, and the necessity of mobile accessibility for members on the go. This platform would be a virtual wing, a safe haven beneath which survivors could land when reality storms threaten to overturn them. With the email dispatched, John allowed himself a moment of reflection. His own healing journey had been deeply personal. He'd looked fear in the eye, learned to breathe through it, and reclaimed his sense of agency. But he also recognized that trauma was often a solitary ordeal. Without outreach, many suffering souls would remain isolated, their pain intensifying in silence. The next morning, John arrived at the offices of Safe Haven Technologies, the startup partner he'd enlisted to build the platform. Bright, open-plan spaces buzzed with conversation, whiteboards crammed with flowcharts and user stories. He met with Maya Patel, the lead UX designer, a soft-spoken woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of accessibility standards, and Raj Kapoor, the CTO, whose excitement about real-time chat integration was palpable. They sketched out the user journey. A survivor logs in under a pseudonym, completes an onboarding questionnaire to gauge current distress levels, and selects a room focused on specific themes: post-crash anxiety, family grief, future travel planning. Certified counselors staffed each room, while volunteer mentors, people who would walk the same path, offered encouragement and shared coping techniques. The platform would use AI-driven prompts to identify members at risk of self-harm, automatically alerting crisis teams and notifying emergency contacts if necessary. As they refined the concept, John felt a surge of purpose. This was more than a program. It was a living extension of his own story, transforming personal echoes of terror into collective resilience. He shared case studies from his work in Jackson Evers, illustrating how even brief follow-up outreach had reduced PTSD symptoms among crash survivors. Maya sketched wireframes on a digital tablet, and Raj assigned preliminary deadlines: a beta launch in 4 months, full rollout by year's end. Later that afternoon, John took a break to stroll through Piedmont Park. The warm Atlanta sun filtered through magnolia blossoms, and joggers weaved past fountains. He paused at a bench near the lake and watched ducks glide on the glassy surface. Life in its unrushed moments felt fragile and precious, qualities he now cherished more than ever. His phone buzzed with a notification, the obituary section of the local paper. He tapped it anxiously and scrolled through names until he found the entry. Amanda Lee, age 28, survivor of Flight 591's return to Denver, had died in a car accident on I-285. Amanda, the young woman he'd spoken with post-landing, whose tears had met his own in the Seattle survivors group. His chest tightened at the thought that she'd never get to heal her unseen wounds. John stood abruptly, heart pounding. He dialed Dr. Harper's number. After a few rings, her calm voice answered. "Amanda Lee passed away last night," he said, voice low. "She never spoke in depth about her anxiety after the flight. I feel responsible." Dr. Harper's tone was steady. "Grief and loss are part of this work, John. You cannot rescue everyone, but you can build systems so no one falls entirely through the cracks. Amanda would have valued your project. It may save someone else in turn." Her words sank in. He realized that behind every survivor's story were lives still in progress, some at risk of derailment. The new platform would not erase tragedy, but it could foster community and care, offer a refuge long before the news of a loss forced intervention too late. That evening, John drafted a public statement for his foundation's website. In memory of Amanda Lee. Amanda's untimely passing reminds us how trauma shadows us long after headlines fade. We dedicate our upcoming online support network to her memory, ensuring that every survivor has a place to share, to heal, and to feel seen. May no one journey their unseen turbulence alone. He then composed a social media post, encouraging followers to share stories of resilience and to join the beta waitlist for the support platform. As he clicked post, he felt a solemn resolve. His mission was no longer confined to stages and speeches. It had grown into a living ecosystem, one that would cradle survivors through every invisible storm. Lying in bed that night, John listened to the distant hum of traffic and reflected on the day's revelations. He had come to understand that surviving 2 plane emergencies was not merely an act of fortune. It was a gateway into a larger purpose. Destiny, he realized, was woven not only through dramatic escapes from disaster, but through the relentless pursuit of healing, for oneself and for others. He closed his eyes, the city's lights fading behind his lids, and whispered a vow into the quiet, to confront both the visible and the unseen turbulences, to build wings of community beneath survivors' feet, and to honor every life touched by fate's unpredictable currents. The morning light in Denver streamed through the large windows of the Safe Haven Technologies office, illuminating a buzz of anticipation. Today marked the beta launch of the Survivors Network, an online haven John Mitchell had envisioned in the wake of his own traumas. He arrived early, blazer slung over his shoulder, and paused in the lobby to watch the digital countdown on the big screen. 0009 008. At 0, the Join Now button glowed green. Maya Patel, her eyes bright behind round glasses, exhaled in relief. Raj Kapoor tapped furiously on his keyboard, monitoring server loads and chat room stability. Across the room, volunteer mentors, survivors themselves, clutched their coffee cups, eager yet nervous. John cleared his throat. "This is more than a platform," he said, voice steady. "It's a community, born from our collective journey, one that will grow stronger with each person who dares to share their story. Let's welcome them home." Within minutes, registrations rolled in. The first user, under the pseudonym Skyward Spirit, posted in the post-crash anxiety room, "I'm here because I'm terrified to fly again." A few keystrokes later, mentor Winged Hope replied with warmth, "Welcome, I survived a crash in '98. Let's talk about grounding exercises that helped me." John watched as the thread blossomed. Messages of empathy, questions about flashbacks, offers of coping strategies. In the family grief room, another user, Silent Tears, shared a trembling account of losing a spouse in a mid-air collision. A counselor responded within minutes, offering resources and inviting them to a private video session. Suddenly, an alert flashed on Raj's screen. A spike in traffic threatened capacity. Raj's jaw tightened. "We're nearing our server threshold," he warned. Within seconds, users experienced delays loading chat windows. A handful of frustrated messages popped up. "Hello? Is anyone there?" John's heart thudded. Every hesitation online felt like a failed lifeline. He crossed to Raj's station. "Can we reroute users to a temporary waiting room?" he asked. Raj nodded and rolled out a maintenance banner. "Welcome! We're throttling new signups briefly to ensure stable conversations. Please stay tuned." Within minutes, traffic eased and full functionality returned. Maya exhaled a slow breath. "That was close," she murmured. John placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We anticipated growth," he said. "We'll scale up immediately." By midday, over 500 survivors, caregivers, and professionals had joined. John cycled through chat rooms like a shepherd checking on his flock. He read messages from newly registered users, offering quick tips on mindfulness, recommending breathing apps, and sharing comforting anecdotes. He marveled at how a simple virtual space could nourish trust and belonging. When the future travel planning room lit up, John entered. John M. "Hello all, I'm John, and I know that anxiety around flying can feel overwhelming. I'd love to share some techniques that helped me regain confidence. What's the biggest worry you face before boarding?" Responses flooded in. Fear of hidden mechanical failures, panic at takeoff, dread of lost control. John typed with compassion, weaving in personal anecdotes. How he visualized the plane's wings as extensions of his own courage. How he practiced grounding rituals before boarding. Volunteers chimed in with their own stories, creating a chorus of solidarity. As the afternoon sun dipped low, John took a break on the rooftop terrace. He gazed at the Denver skyline, inhaling the crisp air. 2 years had passed since his second flight emergency, and the platform he'd birthed now pulsed with life. He felt a swell of pride and an undercurrent of responsibility. Just then, his phone buzzed. A private message from Skyward Spirit. "Skyward Spirit. Thank you, John. Yesterday, I couldn't sleep. Tonight, I booked a red-eye flight to New York. I'll be terrified, but I feel ready." John's eyes misted. He typed back, "I'm honored to be part of your journey. I'll be thinking of you on that flight. Remember your breathing exercises and the community that stands behind you." He pressed send and lowered the phone, feeling the quiet power of human connection in the digital age. That evening, John convened a video call with Dr. Harper, Maya, Raj, and several mentors. They reviewed usage statistics, technical hiccups, and user feedback. Dr. Harper emphasized the importance of monitoring emotional safety and suggested monthly live webinars on coping skills. Maya proposed a mobile app for on-the-go support. Raj outlined a plan to migrate to cloud servers for better scalability. John listened, synthesizing each insight into a cohesive roadmap. "Our next milestones," he said, "are community-driven, expanding languages for global survivors, integrating AI-driven check-ins to flag high-risk posts, and partnering with airlines for in-flight support links. We'll also need to secure funding for 24/7 counselor coverage." The group nodded in agreement. As the call ended, John lingered, gazing at the mosaic of faces on the screen, each a testament to resilience and shared purpose. Back in his hotel room that night, John reflected on the day's triumphs and trials. The Survivors Network was more than code and servers. It was a living organism fueled by vulnerability and hope. He realized that building this community was perhaps the most significant flight he'd ever undertaken, a journey without predictable trajectories, guided instead by collective courage. He opened his journal and wrote, "Today, we launched lifelines for the unseen turbulences. Each registration, each message, each small victory in the chat rooms reminds me that survival can seed solidarity. As we scale and evolve, may we never lose sight of the human hearts at the core of this mission. He closed the journal and looked out the window at the city lights, each one a potential story waiting to be shared. In the quiet, he felt destiny's gentle nudge, reminding him that though his own flights had tested his mettle, the greatest journey now lay in lifting others above their fears. The pale light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when John Mitchell stepped off the elevator of the Safe Haven Technologies headquarters in Denver. 6 months had passed since the Survivors Network beta launch, and the energy in the open plan office was electric. Monitors lit up with real-time user statistics, active rooms, international logins, hourly chat volumes. From a handful of early adopters, the community had grown into thousands of registered members across 5 continents. Today marked the official kickoff of Phase 2, expanding the platform globally and integrating multilingual support to reach survivors from every corner of the world. John made his way to the War Room, a conference space whose walls were mapped with user growth heat maps, server status dashboards, and flowcharts of translation workflows. Seated around the long table were Maya, Raj, Dr. Harper, and 2 new team members, Ana Costa, a Brazilian psychologist fluent in Portuguese, and Hiro Tanaka, a Tokyo-based community manager with experience in Japanese mental health outreach. "Welcome," John began, voice warm yet urgent. "Our mission is clear: to ensure that no crash survivor, no caregiver, no person living with trauma in any language feels alone. Our data shows remarkable engagement in English and Spanish, but we've barely scratched the surface in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Today, we chart a course for true global impact." Anna tapped her pen against her notebook. "In Brazil," she said, "fear of flying was already high before our platform existed. But since adding Portuguese support last month, we've had more than 800 registrations, many from communities with limited access to therapy. We need culturally sensitive resources, guided meditations voiced by native speakers, user-generated testimonials in local dialects, and partnerships with regional airlines and hospitals." Hiro nodded. "In Japan, stigma around mental health issues runs deep. Our strategy must be subtle, framing the network as a travel wellness community rather than a trauma support group. We'll integrate chapters on general travel tips alongside the survivor narratives, so users can enter without fear of social judgment." Raj brought up a live dashboard. "Server load remains stable, but translation queues are backing up. We need to automate certain processes, machine-assisted draft translations that our volunteer linguists can quickly review rather than doing everything manually. And we need to consider offline access for regions with spotty internet." Dr. Harper, ever the voice of measured compassion, leaned forward. "We must guard against losing the human touch. Automated messages are fine for general guidance, but when someone posts a crisis plea, we need immediate, personalized intervention. That means more on-call counselors fluent in those languages and clear escalation protocols linked to local emergency services." John summarized their top priorities. Scale up translation with AI-assisted tools plus rapid human review. Recruit region-specific counselors and volunteers to ensure 24/7 coverage in new languages. Develop culturally adapted content, meditations, webinars, and local survivor stories. Forge partnerships with international airlines, airports, and mental health NGOs for referral pathways. Enhance mobile and offline functionality so anyone can access support anytime, anywhere. By mid-morning, small working groups had formed, each charged with implementing one of these priorities. John circulated between huddles, offering guidance and capturing fresh ideas in his notebook. He felt the familiar thrill of purpose. This was destiny in action, threads of countless lives converging toward collective healing. That afternoon, he joined Ana for a video call with representatives from Gol Linhas Aéreas, one of Brazil's largest carriers. Through a professional interpreter, John explained the Survivors Network concept. "We envision discrete in-flight announcements, put QR codes on overhead screens linking to emergency support rooms for anxious flyers. We'd also like to donate 1 year of premium counseling subscriptions to any passenger involved in an incident, regardless of fault or insurance. The airline executives exchanged impressed glances. By the call's end, they'd agreed to a pilot program on select domestic routes. Later, back in Denver, John and Hiro participated in a live webinar in Japanese. Over 100 attendees logged in, many posting questions in real time. How can I help my friend who avoids driving? What if I can't afford professional counseling? John shared practical breathing exercises, grounding visualizations, and free resources available on the platform. He felt the bridge of empathy spanned thousands of miles, an unmistakable affirmation that while trauma may be universal, so too is the human capacity to heal. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, John returned to his suburban home. He found a letter from a woman named Fatima in Morocco, written in English. Dear Mr. Mitchell, I lost my brother in a small charter plane crash last year. I thought I was coping until the anniversary brought back unbearable grief. Through the Survivors Network, I read a story from someone in France who lost her spouse in a similar accident. For the first time, I didn't feel isolated. Thank you. He paused, emotions swelling with gratitude and resolve. Fatima's words encapsulated the very reason he'd built this mosaic of connection, to transform solitary suffering into shared strength. That night, as he lay in bed, John reflected on the day's crossroads. Expanding into new regions carried logistical hurdles, cultural sensitivities, and technical complexity. But each challenge was an opportunity to deepen the network's roots, to honor the uniqueness of every survivor's journey, and to prove that the tapestry of hope could span languages and latitudes. He closed his eyes, envisioning the platform's next horizon. Communities in rural India supported by local facilitators, trauma-informed coaches in South Africa, grief-sharing circles in Eastern Europe. The ambition was vast, but the stakes were deeply personal. Behind every username lay a life once shattered, now tentatively rebuilding. Destiny, he thought, is not handed to you in a single moment of miracle. It is woven through the daily choices you make to extend compassion, to foster connection, and to build wings beneath the feet of everyone learning to fly again. With that thought, John drifted into sleep, ready to meet tomorrow's challenges with the same courage that had carried him through 2 harrowing crashes, and now through the boundless turbulence of human need. It was just past dawn when John Mitchell's phone buzzed with alerts. Pilot programs for in-flight support were scheduled to launch on 3 continents within days. First up was a transatlantic route from Sao Paulo to Lisbon, operated by GOL in partnership with TAP Air Portugal. Next, a domestic flight in Japan, and then a short-haul hop between Johannesburg and Cape Town. Each rollout would carry discrete QR codes in overhead bins and seatback literature, directing nervous travelers to specialized chat rooms on the Survivors Network. For John, these were more than pilot tests. They were living proof that his vision of global support was taking flight. He boarded a flight from Denver to São Paulo, accompanied by Ana Costa, his Brazilian psychologist and cultural liaison. As the plane taxied, John watched cabin crew distribute the new materials. One attendant, a woman with kind eyes named Rafaela, paused at his row, quietly asking if he felt ready. John smiled, laying a reassuring hand on her arm. "I'm excited," he said. "This is what we built it for." At cruising altitude, Ana reviewed real-time usage data. Already, a handful of passengers had scanned the QR code, opening the Portuguese Ansiedade de Voo room. A mentor named Aurora Brazil had welcomed them with a calming message and links to breathing exercises. Comments trickled in. "My hands are shaking. I haven't flown since my accident. Thank you for being here." Each notification was a spark of connection, igniting hope thousands of miles from Denver. John leaned back, remembering his own first flight after the Mississippi crash. Then, a lone man clutching a crumpled boarding pass. now an entire ecosystem of care. He closed his eyes and visualized the complex web of servers, counselors, and volunteers humming in harmony, a network of wings cradling vulnerable souls. Upon arrival in São Paulo, John was met by rail-thin journalists and airline executives eager to witness the initiative. At a press event atop the airport's observation deck, he spoke through a translator. "Today, we bridge the gap between fear and flight," he declared. "By offering real-time support in the very moments anxiety strikes, we ensure that passengers aren't alone in the sky. This is not charity, it's safety, wellness, and community in action." The applause was warm, but John's mind raced ahead. He thought of the Japanese rollout, where stigma would require a gentler approach, and of South Africa, where offline access had proved crucial in rural areas with limited connectivity. There was no room for complacency. Back in Denver 2 days later, John convened a video summit with the global regional leads. Screens populated with smiling faces. Anna in São Paulo, Hiro in Tokyo, Thandiwe in Johannesburg, and a newly arrived Xavier in Madrid. Each reported promising early metrics, scans, sign-ups, and heartfelt testimonials. Yet they also flagged challenges, bandwidth constraints, cultural nuances in expressing trauma, and the need for more volunteer mentors fluent in less common dialects. As they strategized, an emergency alert appeared on John's laptop. A regional turboprop en route from Dakar to Bamako had suffered a pressurization failure and executed an emergency descent. Passengers were disembarking in Bamako, shaken and disoriented. The survivors network had already automatically opened a French-language post-emergency room, offering immediate crisis support and posting local ambulance and counseling hotlines. Dozens of users had joined within minutes, trading reassurance and live updates on medical assistance. John's heart clenched as he watched the chat log scroll. "Passager du 12, my ears won't stop ringing, my head hurts." "Mentor Libre, try the 4-7-8 breathing technique. I did it after my scare on a domestic flight last year. You're not alone." "Counselor Aisa, I'm a certified counselor here. How can I help you access medical care?" Tears pricked John's eyes. This was the moment he'd always prepared for, the conversion of abstract support into tangible aid. He tapped a congratulatory message into the global channel, then emailed the airline safety office to offer further collaboration on post-incident protocols. Later that evening, he sat in his hotel room in Bamako, the hum of portable fans blending with distant nighttime traffic. He reflected on the day's events, the São Paulo launch, the solidarity in Dakar, Bamako, and the promise of future rollouts in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He opened his journal and wrote, "Today, we proved that wings aren't just metal and rivets. They're human connections spanning languages, cultures, and crises. Every scan, every message, every gesture of support builds a fortress against fear. This is how resilience takes flight." He paused, closing the notebook and gazing out at the starlit sky. 2 decades ago, he'd survived 2 airplane disasters by mere chance, or perhaps by destiny. But destiny had delivered him here, to this nexus of technology and compassion where thousands of survivors could find solace in shared stories and real-time empathy. In the quiet that followed, John felt the faint stirrings of what lay beyond. Integration with VR exposure therapy, partnerships with global aviation regulators, and an annual summit bringing survivors together in person. The journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Yet, as he rose to prepare for sleep, he carried with him an unshakable truth: that the most powerful wings are woven from the threads of human kindness and the courage to reach out, even when the world tilts beneath us. The dawn light filtered softly through the window of John Mitchell's study in Denver, illuminating the framed maps of his itineraries. each pin a milestone in the journey from survivor to steward of resilience. After years of speaking, writing, and building the Survivors Network, he finally allowed himself a moment of stillness before life's next flight. Today, he would return home to his wife, Emily, and their 2 children, Grace and Owen, after what felt like a lifetime spent cradling others through their fear. His phone buzzed with a final alert from the global support platform, a notification that the network had provided more than 50,000 hours of peer counseling in its first year, in 12 languages and every inhabited continent. The statistic felt miraculous, not because of the number itself, but because each hour represented a flicker of hope, a heartbeat saved from isolation. John stood, stretching, and placed a hand on the map marked Denver Worldwide, a ribbon of connections that circled the globe. He gathered his carry-on bag and walked downstairs, greeted by the rich aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. Emily looked up from the table, her eyes bright with relief. Grace, age 10, bounded in, her arms wrapped around her father's leg. Owen, 8, shyly offered him a drawing, a plane soaring above a ring of joined hands. John swallowed emotion, ruffling his son's hair. "That's beautiful," he whispered, pressing the paper to his heart. Over breakfast, they talked of ordinary things: school projects, neighborhood baseball, the garden he planted last spring. Emily watched him as he laughed with the kids, her gaze warm and steady. It was here, in the gentle constancy of home, that John found the counterbalance to his work, the simple gifts of being present, of holding hands rather than microphones, of building forts instead of virtual forums. By mid-morning, John settled into his home office. No servers to monitor today, no calls with overseas teams. He logged into the Survivors Network dashboard one last time before a week-long hiatus he'd planned with his family. The real-time metrics glowed on the screen: active sessions, new registrations, messages of gratitude. He clicked through a few heartfelt testimonials. "Because of this community, I booked my first flight in 5 years. I felt wings where there was only weight. My son, who witnessed the crash, finally sleeps through the night. I never thought I'd see a day when I could share solace instead of suffering." John read each one slowly, absorbing the lifeblood of his mission. Then, with a gentle resolve, he clicked Log Out. The screen faded, replaced by the quiet hum of his home network. He rose and walked to the living room where Emily was folding laundry, smiling at him over the soft hum of the dryer. They left the children in charge of the cat and dog and headed out for a long hike in the foothills. The Colorado air was crisp, scented with pine and earth. As they climbed the trail hand in hand, the challenges of the past, 2 crashes, countless sleepless nights, the weight of others' pain, seemed to fall away, replaced by the steady rhythm of their footsteps. At the summit, they paused to take in the panorama. Jagged peaks glowing in morning light, valleys carpeted in sagebrush, rivers glinting like silver threads. John closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of the world beneath him. He thought of every life touched by the Survivors Network, every stranger who found strength in shared vulnerability. He thought of Dr. Harper's early words: "Surviving 2 crashes is extraordinary. Surviving the aftermath is the true miracle." And he realized that the miracle was not in his own endurance, but in the cascading resilience he'd helped ignite in others. Emily squeezed his hand. "Where to next?" she asked, her eyes bright with shared adventure. John smiled and opened his journal, pen poised over the blank pages of tomorrow's outline. He wrote a single line: "Next chapter, life beyond fear, together." He closed the book and slipped his arm around Emily's waist. As they began their descent, the world stretched out before them, boundless, unpredictable, and brimming with promise. For John Mitchell, destiny had not ended with 2 miraculous escapes from disaster. It had only begun in the lives he'd helped mend, in the communities he'd woven, and in the homecomings he cherished most of all.